This is the Gaston Gazette WGNC postgame show, powered by Tyndall Ford Subaru and brought to you by Behind Enemy Lines Paintball, Pack Brothers Collision Center, Mr. Nobody Gaston Tire Service. And now for all the scores, updates, and hard-hitting analysis on this week's high school football games, here's your host, Brian Rushing.
And it's week 9 in the books here in the Big South Conference and in Weston, in Lincoln, in Cleveland County this evening, as it has been an eventful night. And so glad that you're here with us on the Gaston Gazette WGNC postgame show, driven proudly by Tyndall Ford Subaru. Brian Rushing here with you at the beginning of the postgame show, week 9, in what was honestly in this area one real matchup of note. Certainly East Gaston, Ashbrook played at Ashbrook. Hunter Huss took on Lake Norman Charter. We're going to talk about some of those games as we progress throughout the evening. But the game amongst games this evening was the matchup at Forest View High School. It was their homecoming, and the South Point Red Raiders took a lot of folks with them down Union Road to take on the Forest View Jaguars in a game that, Carson, I've got to be honest with you. By the way, I want to welcome Carson Dockery on board with us here. He's our producer. Intern Bethany is back with us this evening. Carson, I got to be honest with you. That was the most folks that I've seen at a high school football game since the days of Ashbrook Huss back in the mid-'80s, or back in the mid-'80s during Ashbrook's extended playoff runs when they would play the likes of Greensboro, Page, and so on and so forth. I know I mentioned that last week because it was a big crowd, and Ashbrook represented at Belmont last week. But this crowd this week was just simply unbelievable. There were people, Carson, I had to park on Beatty Road, which is in front of the track at the elementary school. I mean, I was a long ways off. And the myth about media getting the special privileges and everything, no, it doesn't apply. Now, granted, maybe there was an area for the media to park. Maybe Phil Gardner can fill me in on that later on. I'm not privy to that information. I know I had great seats tonight. I mean, I was on the field. I mean, it was a fantastic view, and it was a very electric atmosphere. Certainly, everyone for Forest View was jazzed and ready to go. South Point brought a lot of people. It was a great atmosphere. It was a college conference game type atmosphere. I mean, I can't imagine what the final number on the people that were there at the game tonight between South Point and Forest View. And as it turns out, you got to hear it on 1450 AM this evening and certainly on WGNC.net. This was, as far as media coverage, they were having to kick people out of the press box. I didn't want to see it from the press box. I wanted to feel the energy on the field, and I was able to do just that. And the atmosphere was just unbelievable. And after both teams, had drives that stalled essentially, they exchanged punts. South Point started moving the ball down on their second drive, ultimately scored. But then two crucial plays that I think began to set the tone this evening between South Point and Forest View was Jaquan Brooks faked a belly handoff out of that Redbone triple option offense that they run and sprinted to the other end of the field, making a great move on top of the crown in the center of the field, and then getting down that left sideline and ultimately making it a goal-to-go situation where ultimately they punched it in for a second touchdown and took a 14-point lead. Now, in effect, that's as close as really Forest View got. It did get to 14-7, but essentially they were doing a lot of trading possessions with scoring drives and really forced Forest View to do some things that maybe they weren't necessarily wanting to do in regards to their game plan. However, the second play that I thought was incredibly telling was Forest View going down the field. Logan Bradley running the offense throws a pass down along the right flat, and the tip drill happens with South Point, where I believe it did touch three separate South Point players before it was actually brought in and returned some distance down the field. That play was a backbreaker there because from that point, South Point took, I think, what was at that time a 28-7 lead, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Forest View did get back into it with a 28-14 play. I think it was C.J. Bumgardner got one of his 2 touchdown receptions to make it 28-14. That's where we stood at half. Unfortunately, for Forest View, they were really able to get no closer. As the game finished, I think the final score was 49-34. Is that correct? 49-34 was the final this evening that you got to hear on WGNC 1450 AM here in Gastonia. So, folks, this was the game that a lot of folks were looking to, and a lot of folks were very curious as to whether or not Forest View could take care of business. And unfortunately, because of the nights that the South Point runners had, I saw in the first half one attempted pass. And I think from that there was a defensive hold on Forest View that basically nullified the pass. As effective as South Point was running the ball, 2 weeks ago, this club scuffled a little bit against Huss, almost lost the game, picked it back up in the second half against Ashbrook after looking a little groggy, especially in the first quarter offensively. They didn't look groggy at all. That first drive they had tonight against Forest View played that very well, but then from that point on, it's almost like Jaquan Brooks and Tyler Bray and DeAndre King just took it into a different gear. And we're going to talk about that trio of players here in just a little bit. So, for those of you that are out there, I would love to hear from you tonight. If you're on Twitter, certainly you can send the tweets to at Gazette Sports. You can send them to at Carson Dockery. Then, of course, you can send them to at Voice Carolinas. I'm less apt to look at mine during the course of the broadcast. So Carson has the big laptop running in front of him. Actually, it's a desktop. He's not using the laptop tonight at this point, but the desktop is ready to go. Fire off the tweets. Certainly, if you've got emails, you can send them to the Voice Carolinas email box, Brian at voicecarolinas.com. I got to confess, folks, I'm kind of working in a weird spot today. It was definitely a tale of 2 days, or 2 sides to the day, if you will. The afternoon and morning session for me, that business part of my day, was really pretty rotten. So, coming into tonight's game, I was certainly looking for a lift. I was looking for a pick-me-up. I was hoping that the atmosphere that came from this high school football game this evening would sort of lift my spirits a little bit, and as it turns out, it did exactly that. I mean, this game, I only wished I could have stayed for the second half. I had to get back and do show prep. I wanted to stay for the second half. This game had everything that you wanted out of a high school game and then some, and I just stayed for the first half. But now I get in here into the studio, into the newsroom, and what's waiting on me? A little bit of Lucky Samurai. Now, those of you that don't know what Lucky Samurai is the new Japanese place. Now, Long Creek Fish Fry pretty much scared everybody off. The food has been so good the first 2 times that we brought Long Creek Fish Fry in. I don't know if anybody ever decided that, hey, we can beat that, we can top that, so we're going to give it a try. Chris Ballard and the folks at the Lucky Samurai have certainly done this. This food is incredibly good, and for us to have it here at the staff, I know Gabe, Matt Memrick, those guys over in the actual newsroom, they've scarfed down. We've been scarfing down. You're going to see me try to knock some back during the commercial breaks and stuff this evening if you're watching on GastonGazette.com. This is a new Japanese place here in town. It is just behind the Payless Shoe Source on Franklin Boulevard. It's technically on New Hope, but it's right in that corner of New Hope and Franklin to where it's just behind Payless, basically right there in front of the Firestone, the Red Lobster, the mall, all that. It's a relatively new place. It is a fantastic place, and Chris and his staff at Lucky Samurai do a great job with the food, and I'm going to devour some here in just a little bit when we get to a commercial break. So a couple of things that we're going to talk about. We're going to go into a little more in-depth analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the great things that Phil Gardner had in this afternoon or this morning's Gaston Gazette. Of course, tonight's highlights become tomorrow's headlines on the Gaston Gazette, sold at newsstands throughout Gaston County. But, of course, you can deliver and you can still get the online version. Go to GastonGazette.com and find out how you can get yourself a digital subscription. But when we come back from our commercial break, we'll talk more in depth about the South Point game. But another thing that I want to do, as in we're in week 9, and I want to talk about some of the Millennium men inside the Gazette area, those 1,000-yard rushers that we have. We picked up a few more tonight. We're still waiting on some stats for a couple guys. And then I'm going to blow you away with a South Point Red Raiders offensive stat that is just going to be mind-boggling. And mind you, we're just through week 9 of the regular season. So we'll do all that. We'll get into the scores in just a little bit. You are listening to and watching the Gaston Gazette WGNC postgame show, driven proudly by Tyndall Ford Subaru here in Gastonia. We'll be right back.